Jake Morrison sat alone in the corner booth of Murphy's bar, nursing his third whiskey of the evening. The space station's artificial gravity made the amber liquid swirl slowly in his glass, reminding him of the lazy rivers back on Earth. He hadn't been home in 3 years. Not since he'd left the Colonial Marines under circumstances he preferred not to think about. Station Omega-7 was the kind of place where people came to disappear. Built into an asteroid in the outer rim, it served as a neutral meeting ground for smugglers, mercenaries, and anyone else who needed to stay off the official shipping lanes. Jake had been living here for 6 months, taking odd jobs and keeping his head down. His military pension was enough to cover basic expenses, but barely. The bar was crowded tonight, filled with beings from dozens of different worlds. A group of Centaurian traders argued loudly over a card game while a lone vegan pilot stared into his drink. The air recyclers worked overtime to filter out the mixture of alien scents and cigarette smoke. Jake had learned to appreciate the chaos. It meant nobody paid attention to one human in the corner. He was about to order another drink when a shadow fell across his table. Jake looked up to see a nervous-looking Zeltharian standing beside his booth. The alien was tall and thin, with green scales that seemed to shimmer under the bar's dim lights. His large eyes darted around the room constantly, as if he expected trouble at any moment. "You are Jake Morrison," the alien said in accented standard. It wasn't a question. Jake set down his glass carefully. "Depends who's asking." "My name is Crix. I represent certain interests that require your particular skills." The Zeltharian's voice was barely above a whisper. "May I sit?" Jake gestured to the empty seat across from him. Crix slid into the booth, his movements quick and bird-like. He kept his hands visible on the table, which Jake appreciated. Most beings who sought him out were either desperate or dangerous, sometimes both. "What kind of skills are we talking about?" Jake asked. Krx reached into his jacket slowly, producing a small datapad. "Before we discuss business, I need to know. If you're interested in work that pays well but carries significant risk," Jake almost smiled, "risk is my middle name. The payment would be 5 million credits, transferred to any account you specify upon completion of the task." Crix's eyes never stopped moving. No questions asked, no records kept. That got Jake's attention. 5 million credits was enough to buy a small ship and disappear to one of the paradise worlds in the inner systems. He could spend the rest of his life on a beach somewhere, watching alien sunsets and forgetting about the war. "I'm listening," Jake said. Crix activated the datapad, keeping the screen angled so only Jake could see it. The image showed a massive alien figure in elaborate robes, with 4 arms and a face that looked like it had been carved from black stone. Jake had seen that face before on wanted posters and news broadcasts. "Emperor Vorthak of the Zeltharian Empire," Jake said. "You want me to kill him?" "The Emperor has ruled for 2 centuries, Crix whispered. "His reign has brought nothing but suffering to countless worlds. Entire species have been wiped out for his amusement. Billions of beings live in slavery because of his decrees." Jake studied the image. Vorthak was known throughout the galaxy as one of the most ruthless dictators in history. The Zeltharian Empire controlled nearly a quarter of known space, and every world under their rule lived in terror. "Why me?" Jake asked. "There are plenty of assassins in the galaxy with better reputations." "Because you're human," Crix said simply. "Your species is new to the galactic community. The Emperor's security systems don't account for human capabilities. You're faster than most beings, more adaptable, and most importantly, you're unknown to his intelligence networks." Jake leaned back in his seat. "You've done your homework." "I know you served in the Colonial Marines for 8 years, Crix continued. "I know you specialized in deep reconnaissance and elimination of high-value targets. I know you left the service after the incident on Kepler 442, Jake's jaw tightened. "That's classified information? "I also know you've been taking jobs that barely cover your expenses," Crix pressed on. "Security work, bodyguard duties, debt collection. You're wasting your talents on small-time operations." "Maybe I like small-time operations," Jake said. They don't usually end with me being hunted across the galaxy. Crix leaned forward. The Emperor's fortress world of Dominus Prime has never been successfully infiltrated. His palace contains defenses that have turned back armies. But those defenses were designed to stop conventional threats. They weren't designed to stop a human. Jake picked up his glass and swirled the whiskey slowly. What makes you think I can succeed where others have failed? Because humans think differently, Crix said. Other species rely on brute force or advanced technology. Humans use deception, misdirection, and psychological warfare. You find weaknesses where others see only strength. And if I refuse? Then the Emperor continues his reign of terror, Crix said. And eventually his attention will turn to Earth. Human colonies are already on his radar. It's only a matter of time before he decides your species is a threat that needs to be eliminated. Jake drained his glass and set it down with a soft clink. Tell me about the security. For the next hour, Crix laid out everything he knew about the Emperor's defenses. Dominus Prime was a fortress world, its surface covered with military installations and defensive batteries. The Emperor's palace sat at the center of the largest city, protected by energy shields, automated weapon systems, and an army of elite guards. The Emperor trusts no one completely, Crix explained. But he has 6 high chancellors who handle the day-to-day operations of the Empire. They're the only ones with regular access to his private chambers. What about his daily routine? He follows the same schedule every day. Morning audiences in the throne room, afternoon meetings with his advisors, evening meals alone in his private quarters. He's paranoid about assassination attempts, but that paranoia has made him predictable. Jake absorbed every detail, his military training automatically categorizing the information. The job would be difficult but not impossible. The key would be patience and careful planning. How do I get off-world after the job is done? Jake asked. We'll have a ship waiting at the spaceport, Crix said. Clean identity documents, enough fuel to reach neutral space. And the money? Half now, half on completion. Crix produced a credit chip and slid it across the table. That's 2.5 million credits, more than enough to fund your operation. Jake picked up the chip and felt its weight. Such a small thing to hold so much potential. He could walk away right now, take the money and disappear. But Crix was right about one thing. Eventually, the Emperor's attention would turn to humanity. Better to strike first. I'll need time to plan, Jake said. Of course, Crix replied. But not too much time. There are forces moving in the shadows, and our window of opportunity won't stay open forever. Jake pocketed the credit chip and stood up. I'll be in touch. As he walked away from the table, Jake felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He'd accepted the contract, but something told him this job would be different from all the others. The Emperor's death would send shockwaves throughout the galaxy, and Jake Morrison would be at the center of it all. He had no idea that this single decision would change the course of galactic history. Jake spent the next 3 weeks studying everything he could find about Dominus Prime. The fortress world was a monument to Emperor Vorthak's cruelty, its surface scarred by centuries of war and construction. Massive spires rose from the ground, like black teeth, built from materials that Jake didn't want to think about too closely. The orbital defense platforms alone could destroy entire fleets. And that was just the beginning. The Emperor's palace dominated the capital city of Morthek. Jake stared at the holographic display in his small quarters, memorizing every detail. The structure was enormous, covering nearly 50 square kilometers and rising 200 stories into the blood-red sky. Intelligence reports suggested it housed over 1 million beings. From servants and guards to administrators and torture specialists, getting inside would be the easy part. Staying alive long enough to complete the mission would be harder. Jake had studied the security protocols for days, looking for patterns and weaknesses. The Emperor's paranoia had created a system so complex that it had become predictable. Guards changed shifts every 6 hours, patrol routes followed the same patterns, and access codes were updated on a rigid schedule, but Jake needed more than just security information. He needed a cover identity that would get him close to the Emperor without raising suspicion. After careful consideration, he decided to pose as a slave trader. The role disgusted him, but it was perfect for his needs. The empire's economy depended on slave labor, and traders moved freely between worlds without much scrutiny. Jake used part of Crix's advance payment to acquire the necessary documents and equipment. A forged license from the Traders Guild, a small cargo ship with hidden compartments, and a selection of alien artifacts that would make his cover story believable. He even bought a few actual slaves from a dealer on Nexus Station, planning to free them once he reached Dominus Prime. The journey to the fortress world took 2 weeks. Jake used the time to perfect his cover identity and study the intelligence REPORTS Crix had provided. The Emperor maintained a rigid daily schedule, meeting with his 6 high chancellors every morning before holding court with various petitioners and visiting dignitaries. Jake's best chance would be during the evening hours when Vorthak retired to his private chambers. Dominus Prime's customs officials were thorough but predictable. Jake's forged documents passed their scans, and his cargo of artifacts drew appreciative nods from the inspection team. They were particularly interested in a collection of carved bone fragments that Jake claimed came from the extinct Corellian species. The inspector's eyes gleamed with greed as he examined the pieces. "These are magnificent specimens," the official said in accented standard. The Emperor would be very interested in acquiring such items for his collection. Jake smiled. "I was hoping to arrange a private audience. I have many more pieces that might interest His Imperial Majesty." The customs official's greed overcame his caution. "I believe something can be arranged. For a small consideration, of course." Jake handed over a bag of credits, and within hours, he had an appointment to meet with one of the palace's acquisition specialists. The first phase of his plan was working perfectly. The palace's lower levels were a maze of corridors and chambers that housed the Empire's vast bureaucracy. Jake followed his escort through hallways lined with trophy cases containing the skulls and artifacts of conquered species. The walls themselves were covered with detailed murals depicting the Emperor's victories, each one more brutal than the last. His meeting with the acquisition specialist went smoothly. The Zeltharian official was impressed by Jake's collection and agreed to arrange a meeting with the palace's head curator. Jake spent the next week establishing his reputation as a reliable dealer in rare artifacts, slowly working his way up the hierarchy. During this time, Jake carefully mapped the palace's layout and security systems. He posed as a curious trader, asking innocent questions about the building's history and architecture. The palace staff were proud of their workplace and happy to share information with someone who showed genuine interest. Jake learned that the Emperor's private chambers were located on the 150th floor, accessible only through a series of secured elevators and checkpoints. The area was guarded by the Emperor's personal bodyguards, elite warriors who had been genetically modified for combat. They were faster and stronger than baseline Zeltharians, with enhanced senses and reflexes, but Jake also discovered something more important. The Emperor's paranoia had created a weakness in his security system. Vorthak trusted no one completely, not even his bodyguards. The private chambers were equipped with automated defense systems that could be activated to eliminate any threat, including the guards themselves. Jake realized he could use this paranoia against the Emperor. The breakthrough came during his 3rd week on Dominus Prime. Jake had finally gained access to the palace's middle levels, where the Emperor's administrative staff worked. He posed as a trader looking to sell information about rebel activities on the Outer Rim worlds. The intelligence officers were interested in his story and invited him to a private meeting. During the meeting, Jake learned about the Emperor's daily routine in much greater detail. Vorthak began each day with a meal in his private dining room, then moved to his throne room for the morning audiences. Afternoons were spent in meetings with his high chancellors, reviewing reports and issuing orders. But the evenings were different. Every night, the Emperor retired to his private chambers at exactly 2100 hours. He dismissed all his guards and activated the automated defense systems, sealing himself inside until dawn. For 12 hours he was alone and vulnerable. Jake realized this was his window of opportunity. The intelligence officers were so impressed with Jake's information that they arranged for him to meet with Chancellor Drax, the Emperor's military commander. Jake knew this was dangerous, but also represented an opportunity to gather crucial intelligence about the palace's defenses. Drax was a massive Zeltharian with scarred scales and cold eyes. He received Jake in his private office, a chamber filled with weapons from across the galaxy. The Chancellor was particularly interested in Jake's reports about human military capabilities. "Your species is new to the galaxy," Drax said, studying Jake with predatory interest. "But already you show promise as warriors. The Emperor is curious about human potential." Jake kept his expression neutral. "Humans are adaptable. We learn quickly and overcome obstacles through innovation rather than brute force." "Interesting," Drax mused. "Perhaps we should consider recruiting human mercenaries for our campaigns." The meeting lasted for 2 hours, with Jake carefully balancing his need for information against the risk of arousing suspicion. He learned about the palace's security protocols, the locations of key defensive systems, and most importantly, the Chancellor's schedule. Drax would be away from the palace for 3 days next week, inspecting military installations on the outer moons. Jake left the meeting with a new appreciation for the challenge ahead. The Emperor's security was even more complex than he had imagined, but he had also identified several weaknesses he could exploit. The automated defense systems could be turned against their master, and the Emperor's isolation made him vulnerable to a skilled infiltrator. Over the following days, Jake finalized his plans. He would strike during the Chancellor's absence, using the confusion of a shift change to penetrate the palace's upper levels. The Emperor's evening routine would provide the perfect opportunity, but Jake would have only a narrow window to complete his mission and escape as he prepared for the assault. Jake felt the familiar calm that came before combat. His military training took over, pushing aside doubt and fear. He had studied the target, identified the weaknesses, and prepared for every contingency. Tomorrow night, Emperor Vorthik would die, and Jake Morrison would collect the largest payday of his career. He had no idea that killing the Emperor would be the easy part of his mission. Jake waited in the shadows of the palace's maintenance level, watching the guard rotation through his enhanced vision goggles. The shift change happened exactly at 2100 hours, just as his intelligence had predicted. 2 guards walked past his hiding spot, their heavy boots echoing in the metal corridor. They were discussing the evening meal, completely unaware that death was lurking just meters away, moving like a ghost. Jake slipped from his hiding place and made his way toward the service elevator that would take him to the upper levels. He had memorized every corridor, every camera angle, every security checkpoint. The palace's automated systems were designed to stop armies. Not a single human with the right knowledge and equipment. The service elevator required a security code. But Jake had been watching the maintenance staff for weeks. He punched in the numbers and felt the elevator begin its long climb toward the Emperor's private chambers. Each floor that passed brought him closer to his target and closer to the biggest payday of his career. Floor 50 passed, then 70, then 100. Jake checked his equipment one final time. The ceramic knife would not trigger metal detectors. The electronic scrambler would disable security cameras for exactly 90 seconds. The lockpick device could open any door in the palace. Everything was ready. The elevator stopped at floor 145. Jake stepped out into a corridor that looked different from the lower levels. The walls were covered with precious metals and rare stones, while the floors were made from polished bone. This was the Emperor's domain, where only the most trusted servants were allowed. Jake moved through the corridor with practiced silence, avoiding the patrol routes he had memorized. The first checkpoint appeared ahead, manned by 2 of the Emperor's elite guards. These were not ordinary soldiers, but genetically enhanced warriors with superhuman senses and reflexes. Jake would have to be very careful. He activated his electronic scrambler and watched the security cameras go dark. The guards noticed immediately, but they assumed it was a technical malfunction. While they called for a repair team, Jake slipped past them and continued toward the Emperor's chambers. The next obstacle was a pressure-sensitive floor that would trigger alarms if anyone stepped on it without proper authorization. Jake had studied the palace blueprints and knew about this defense. He used his climbing gear to traverse the ceiling, moving hand over hand above the deadly floor. 3 more checkpoints fell to Jake's combination of skill and technology. Each guard post was designed to stop conventional threats, but Jake was anything but conventional. His human adaptability allowed him to find solutions that no other species would consider. Finally, Jake reached the entrance to the Emperor's private chambers. The massive doors were made from black metal and covered with warning symbols in a dozen languages. Behind those doors lay the most powerful being in the galaxy, completely unaware that his death was approaching. Jake used his lockpick device to bypass the door's security system. The mechanism was incredibly complex, with multiple layers of encryption and fail-safes. But Jake was patient, working through each layer until he heard the soft click of success. The doors opened silently, revealing a chamber that took Jake's breath away. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness. The walls were covered with trophies from the Emperor's conquests, weapons, artwork, and preserved body parts from extinct species. In the center of the room stood a massive bed carved from a single piece of black stone. Emperor Vorthak lay sleeping on the bed, his forearms spread wide and his breathing deep and regular. He looked smaller than Jake had expected, but there was no mistaking the aura of power that surrounded him. This being had ruled the galaxy for 2 centuries, crushing entire civilizations beneath his will. Jake approached the bed with his ceramic knife ready. The Emperor's security had been perfect in every way except one. They had never encountered a human assassin. Jake raised the knife, preparing to complete his mission and claim his reward. The blade slid between the Emperor's ribs, with surgical precision, piercing his heart and ending his reign in a single stroke. Vorthak's eyes opened for a moment, filled with surprise and confusion, then closed forever. The most feared ruler in galactic history was dead. Jake should have left immediately, but something made him pause. The Emperor's private chambers contained more than just trophies and furniture. There was a massive computer terminal built into the far wall, its screens flickering with data streams and classified documents. Jake's curiosity got the better of him. He activated the terminal and began scrolling through the files. What he found made his blood run cold. The Emperor had been planning something called the Great Cleansing, a systematic extermination of every sentient species in the galaxy. The project was scheduled to begin in 72 hours. With the first target being Earth itself, Jake stared at the screen in horror as the full scope of the plan became clear. The Emperor had been secretly building a massive fleet of automated warships, each one capable of sterilizing an entire planet. The Zeltharian military didn't even know about the project, which was being coordinated directly by the 6 High Chancellors. The files contained detailed intelligence on every major species in the galaxy, including humanity. The Empire had been studying human colonies for months, analyzing their defenses and cataloging their weaknesses. Jake found reports describing humans as a dangerous species that needed to be eliminated before they could spread further into the galaxy. But the most chilling discovery was the method of execution. The automated warships would release a biological weapon designed to target specific genetic markers. Every human in the galaxy would die within hours, from the colonies on the outer rim to Earth itself. The weapon was already loaded and ready for deployment. Jake realized that killing the Emperor had only made the situation worse. The Great Cleansing was designed to activate automatically if Vorthak died unexpectedly. The 6 High Chancellors would assume control of the project and begin the extermination within days. Jake had completed his contract, but in doing so, he had condemned his entire species to death. The terminal screens showed the current status of the project. The automated fleet was already moving into position around human space. The biological weapons were being prepared for deployment. In less than 3 days, every human being would be dead unless someone stopped the High Chancellors. Jake sat back in the Emperor's chair, trying to process what he had learned. He had come here to kill one alien tyrant and collect his payment. Instead, he had discovered a genocide plot that would destroy humanity and every other species in the galaxy. The contract was complete, but the real work was just beginning. He looked at the Emperor's corpse and felt a grim satisfaction. Vorthak had been a monster who deserved to die, but his death had unleashed something even worse. The 6 High Chancellors would now have complete control over the Empire's resources, and they would use that power to cleanse the galaxy of all life. Jake began downloading the files onto his personal data storage device. The intelligence would be crucial for what came next. He had to find a way to stop the High Chancellors before they could complete their master's final plan. The clock was ticking, and humanity's survival depended on one human assassin who had already gone far beyond his original mission. As he prepared to leave the chamber, Jake made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He would not run, he would not hide. He would hunt down every single High Chancellor and stop the Great Cleansing, no matter the cost. The Emperor was dead, but Jake Morrison's real war was just beginning. Jake had 72 hours to save the galaxy, and he intended to use every minute. The files from the Emperor's computer revealed the locations of all 6 High Chancellors, their schedules, and most importantly, their individual roles in the Great Cleansing Project. Each Chancellor controlled a different piece of the Empire's war machine, and without their coordination, the genocide would be impossible. Chancellor Xeris was the easiest target to locate. The alien commander lived aboard the massive space station that controlled the Imperial fleet, orbiting Dominus Prime like a metal moon. Jake knew that a direct assault would be suicide, so he decided to use the Empire's own paranoia against them. Jake stole a maintenance shuttle from the palace's vehicle bay and flew toward the orbital shipyards. The yards were massive structures where the Empire's warships were built and repaired. Thousands of workers moved between the construction platforms, following schedules that had remained unchanged for decades, using his skills as a former Marine engineer. Jake accessed the shipyard's computer systems and began making small changes to the navigation programs of the Imperial fleet. He inserted tiny errors into the star charts, altered course calculations by fractions of degrees, and modified the timing systems that controlled fleet movements. When Chancellor Xeris gave the order for the fleet to move into position around human space, the ships began following their corrupted navigation data. Instead of forming attack formations, they flew directly into each other. The collision between the flagship and 3 heavy cruisers created a chain reaction that destroyed dozens of vessels in minutes. Jake watched the carnage from his stolen shuttle as the entire Imperial fleet tore itself apart. Ships crashed into space stations, fighters collided with their own carriers, and the automated defense systems began firing on anything that moved. Within 6 hours, 60% of the Empire's naval power was floating debris. Chancellor Xeris died when his command ship collided with an ammunition depot, taking the fleet's entire command structure with him. 1 down, 5 to go. Chancellor Toval controlled the Empire's communication networks from a fortified compound on the industrial world of Nexus 7. Jake arrived at the planet 12 hours after the fleet disaster, posing as a refugee from the orbital battle. The planet's security forces were too busy dealing with the crisis to pay attention to one human survivor. The communication center was a massive complex filled with relay stations and data processing equipment. Jake spent 3 days infiltrating the facility, learning its layout and identifying key vulnerabilities. He discovered that Chancellor Toval was not just managing communications but also coordinating the cover-up of the Emperor's death. Instead of killing Toval immediately, Jake decided to expose the truth. He hacked into the main communication array and began broadcasting footage of the Emperor's death to every world in the Empire. The recordings also included the complete files about the Great Cleansing Project, revealing the genocide plans to billions of beings across the galaxy. The reaction was immediate and violent. Rebellions erupted on hundreds of worlds as enslaved species learned that their freedom was just days away from being permanently eliminated. The Empire's communication networks were overwhelmed by emergency messages, distress calls, and coordination. Attempts between rebel groups, Chancellor Toval died trying to shut down the broadcasts, electrocuted by his own security systems when Jake triggered a power surge through the main control panel. The communication networks collapsed completely, leaving the remaining chancellors isolated and unable to coordinate their efforts. Chancellor Marin ran the Empire's secret police from a hidden facility beneath the capital city of Dominus Prime. Jake returned to the fortress world to find it in complete chaos. The broadcasts had triggered riots in the streets, and the secret police were fighting a losing battle against millions of angry citizens. Jake used the confusion to infiltrate the underground complex where Marin maintained her operations. The facility was a maze of interrogation chambers, prison cells, and torture rooms. Jake had seen similar places during his military service, but nothing quite as systematic and cruel as this. He found detailed files on every secret police operation. For the past 50 years, the records revealed decades of betrayal, corruption, and internal warfare within the Empire's intelligence services. Jake realized he could use this information to turn the secret police against their own leadership. Jake began releasing the files through the facility's internal network, exposing which agents had betrayed their colleagues and which operations had been designed to eliminate rival factions. The paranoid intelligence apparatus immediately began settling old scores and fighting for control of the organization. Chancellor Marin was killed by her own bodyguards when they learned she had been planning to eliminate them after the Great Cleansing was complete. The secret police collapsed into civil war, with different factions hunting each other through the underground tunnels. Chancellor Vex controlled the Empire's economic systems from a heavily guarded complex on the banking world of Meridian Prime. Jake arrived to find the planet in economic freefall as news of the Emperor's death spread through the financial markets. The banking complex was a fortress of glass and steel, protected by energy shields and automated defenses. Jake spent 2 days studying the building's security systems before discovering that the economic networks were vulnerable to a different kind of attack. Using his access to the Imperial communication systems, Jake began flooding the financial markets with false information about the Empire's economic stability. He simultaneously drained the treasuries of 50 different worlds and began counterfeiting Imperial credits on a massive scale. The economic collapse happened within hours. The Imperial currency became worthless as fake credits flooded the markets. Banking systems crashed as they tried to process impossible transactions. The Empire's ability to fund its military operations disappeared overnight. Chancellor Vex died of a heart attack when he learned that his personal fortune had been transferred to rebel groups across the galaxy. The economic infrastructure that held the Empire together crumbled. Leaving individual worlds to fend for themselves, Chancellor Drax commanded the Empire's ground forces from a mobile command center that moved between military bases. Jake tracked him to a massive parade ground where the Chancellor was reviewing troops and trying to maintain order in the face of the growing crisis. Jake infiltrated the parade by posing as a military reporter, using forged credentials to get close to the reviewing stand. The ceremony was being broadcast live to military bases throughout the Empire, which gave Jake the perfect opportunity to strike. He triggered a small explosive device during the height of the parade, creating chaos and confusion among the assembled troops. In the resulting panic, Jake assassinated Chancellor Drax and escaped in the confusion. But before leaving, he uploaded classified troop deployment data to the public networks. Rebel groups across the galaxy suddenly had detailed information about every Imperial garrison, supply depot, and command center. Coordinated attacks began within hours, with rebels striking at the most vulnerable targets first. The Empire's ground forces found themselves fighting on 1,000 different fronts. Simultaneously, only one chancellor remained, Corvain, the most dangerous of them all. He controlled the Empire's intelligence networks and had been tracking Jake's activities with increasing accuracy. Their final confrontation would determine the fate of the galaxy. Jake returned to the ruins of the Imperial Palace, where Corvain was waiting with a small army of elite guards. The hunt was about to become a battle. The Imperial Palace was a ruin. Smoke rose from dozens of fires throughout the massive structure, and the sounds of distant explosions echoed through the empty corridors. Jake moved carefully through the debris-filled hallways, knowing that Chancellor Corvain was somewhere in the building waiting for him. Corvain was different from the other chancellors. While they had controlled armies and fleets and economic systems, he controlled information. He knew every secret in the Empire, every weakness, every hidden agenda. He had been tracking Jake's movements for days, learning his patterns and predicting his next moves. Jake found the first trap on the 15th floor. A simple explosive device hidden behind a fallen beam, designed to kill anyone who followed the most obvious route through the wreckage. Jake disarmed it carefully and continued upward. Knowing that more surprises awaited him, the second trap was more sophisticated. Corvain had used the palace's automated defense systems to create a maze of laser barriers and pressure plates. Jake spent an hour navigating through the deadly obstacles, using mirrors and metal fragments to redirect the laser beams and trigger the traps safely. On the 50th floor, Jake found evidence that Corvain had been studying him for weeks. Detailed files contained information about Jake's military service, his psychological profile, and even recordings of his conversations with other beings. The Chancellor had been preparing for this confrontation since the moment Jake arrived on Dominus Prime, but Jake had been preparing too. He had learned that Corvain's greatest strength was also his greatest weakness. The Chancellor's obsession with information made him predictable in his own way. He would want to understand how a single human had destroyed the Empire before killing. Jake found Corvain waiting in the Emperor's throne room, surrounded by the trophies of 1,000 conquered worlds. The Chancellor was smaller than Jake had expected, with pale scales and intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. He held a weapon that Jake recognized as a neural disruptor, capable of causing excruciating pain without leaving physical damage. Jake Morrison, Corvain said in perfect standard. You have exceeded all expectations. Your boss is dead, Jake replied. Your empire is falling apart. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live to see tomorrow? Corvain smiled, an expression that looked wrong on his alien features. You think this is about survival? You think any of this was about preserving the Empire? Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What are you talking about? The Great Cleansing was never the Emperor's plan, Corvain explained. It was mine. Vorthak was a useful fool who provided the resources and authority I needed, but the vision was always mine. And you, dear Jake, have helped me accomplish something I could never have achieved alone. The Chancellor gestured toward the massive windows that overlooked the burning city. Look around you. The Empire is destroying itself from within. Every species that was enslaved is now fighting for freedom. Every world that was oppressed is now in rebellion. The old order is dying, and from its ashes something new will emerge. Jake raised his weapon, but Corvain made no move to defend himself. You're insane, am I? Corvain asked. Tell me, what happens next? The Empire collapses, leaving thousands of worlds without government or protection. Some will form alliances, others will descend into chaos. And in that chaos, who will they turn to for leadership? The pieces fell into place in Jake's mind. Humans, exactly, Corvain said. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that no one imagined possible. One human destroyed an empire that lasted for centuries. When the other species look for someone to lead them out of this chaos, they will choose humanity. Jake felt sick. You used me? I gave you the opportunity to save your species and become heroes in the process, Corvain corrected. The Great Cleansing would have happened eventually. The Emperor's paranoia and cruelty were leading the galaxy toward inevitable destruction. I simply accelerated the timeline and ensured that humanity would emerge as the dominant force. And, what do you get out of it? Corvain's smile widened. I get to serve the new galactic order. Who better to advise humanity's leaders than someone who understands the complexities of governing multiple species? I have information and experience that your people will need. Jake realized that killing Corvain would solve nothing. The Chancellor had planned for this possibility too. The information he possessed was too valuable to lose, and his death might create more problems than it solved. What's to stop me from killing you right now? Jake asked. Nothing, Corvain admitted. But think carefully about what you would accomplish. I am the last link to the Empire's intelligence networks. I know which worlds are planning to resist the new order, which species are likely to cause trouble, and which resources will be needed to rebuild galactic civilization. Jake lowered his weapon slightly. You want to make a deal? I want to ensure that the transition of power happens smoothly, Corvain said. The galaxy needs strong leadership, and humanity has proven itself capable of providing it. But your species will need guidance to avoid the mistakes that destroyed previous civilizations. Over the next hour, Corvain laid out his vision for the future. The Galactic Federation would be a voluntary alliance of worlds, governed by representatives from each member species but led by human administrators. The military would be structured around human tactical doctrine, while the economy would be based on free trade rather than slave labor. Jake found himself reluctantly impressed by the Chancellor's planning. Every detail had been considered, from resource allocation to conflict resolution. The proposal was comprehensive and practical, designed to prevent the kind of oppression that had characterized the old empire. Why should I trust you? Jake asked. Because I have spent my entire life studying power structures and their weaknesses, Corvain replied. The empire failed because it was built on fear and oppression. The Federation will succeed because it will be built on cooperation and mutual benefit. Jake spent 3 days negotiating with Corvain, hammering out the details of the transition. The Chancellor provided detailed intelligence about rebel movements, resource stockpiles, and potential threats to galactic stability. In return, Jake agreed to recommend Corvain as an advisor to the new government. The Galactic Federation was formally established 6 months later, with Jake serving as its first Director General. The transition was not without challenges, as some worlds resisted joining the new alliance and others demanded special privileges. But humanity's reputation as problem solvers helped smooth over most difficulties. Crix, the Zeltharian merchant who had originally hired Jake, became the Federation's first ambassador of trade. During the inaugural ceremony, he approached Jake with a question that had been bothering him for months. The contract was for one assassination, Crix said. Why didn't you stop there? Jake looked out at the crowd of celebrating beings from hundreds of different worlds and species. Representatives from former slave worlds stood beside delegates from advanced civilizations, all working together to build something better than what had come before. Because that's not how humans work, Jake replied. We don't just solve the problem in front of us. We solve the problem behind the problem, and the problem behind that one too. You hired a human assassin to kill an emperor. What you got was a human who saved the galaxy. The story of Jake Morrison became legend, told across the stars as proof that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers, but their refusal to accept that anything was impossible. When the galaxy needed saving, they had called upon a human, and humanity had delivered more than anyone had dared to hope. Years later, when new threats emerged from the dark spaces between galaxies, the Federation's response was always the same. Find a human and give them the resources to solve the problem.